Okay, good evening, everyone. There are no agenda changes at this time, and with that, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll, please.
Boomer? Here. Crosby? Here. Fellers?
Here.
Fiducia? Girl?
Present.
Gorel? Present. Hoffman?
Present.
Jury?
Present.
Kelly?
Here.
McDonald?
Present.
Nicolosi?
Here.
Red? Present. Delgado?
Present.
Schultz?
Here.
Tassoni? Webster?
Here.
Westcott?
Present.
Wilson?
Present.
Piando? Booker?
Here.
17 present, 3 absent.
Thank you, Clerk Mullins. With that, I will turn things over to Mrs. Crosby, and I'll ask you all to stand for the prayer and the pledge.
Dear Heavenly Father, Jonah had the whale, Daniel had the lion's den, Israelites had Jericho, Moses had the Red Sea, and Noah had the flood. And we here at the county board have a fiscal responsibility to balance our budget, and that's our Jericho. So we ask you for your divine wisdom and guidance to bring us through the budgeting process. Help us over the humps, work with our electives, and come out whole on the other side. A little divine intervention would certainly be welcome. So we thank you for these things. In the name of your Son, amen. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, everyone. We have a lot to celebrate here this evening, and I'm very excited at how the meeting, we get to kick things off here. I'm going to ask Lottie Barnett to please come up. So tonight we're going to recognize a longtime employee and somebody that's meant a lot to the Winnebago County family with the Chairman's Service Award. And I'll read this very quickly. I mentioned this at the State of the County, that how Lottie is observed and how she's revered in this building, or in the building across the street, the way she conducts business and serves the folks we've been elected to serve on our behalf is an example worth following. With that, I, Frank Haney, Chairman of the Winnebago County Board, hereby recognize Lottie Barnett for outstanding service to the residents of Winnebago County, Illinois. This award recognizes her passion for excellence and a spirit of serving others. This award is not given because of one single action, but rather for ongoing meritorious service. Lottie Barnett is recognized as an example of what is the very best in our community. Lottie, I want to say thank you on behalf of our board for everything you do. There is no employee that I'm aware of that has more taxpayers on their way out the door say great things about us because of what she does. And I know the people in front of me, the board I serve, cares deeply about that, and she is the best of the best. So Lottie, thank you so much. I do want to call out Mr. Graceffa deserves some kudos as well. He hired Lottie some years ago. Ray Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson, I apologize. Mr. Ferguson hired Lottie many years ago. My apologies, sir, but he took the time to be here, as have many of Lottie's colleagues. So again, Lottie, congratulations. Thank you for everything you do. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
To the Honorable Chairman, Mr. Franklin Haney, and to my working family, to all of my friends that have come out tonight to be here to see me witnesses. This is indeed a great honor. It's a great, great honor. I never dreamed June 16th, 1977, that I would be standing here on the 22nd of June, 2017. And I am so happy to be a part of Winnebago County. And I thank everyone, all of my friends, everyone. I just thank you so much for coming to be here with me to witness this, because to me it is a great honor. And I thank you, thank you. God bless, and God bless Winnebago County.
Thank you, Lottie. Next, I would ask Craig Day and Joe Vittori to come up from SureFest. We have a proclamation. Great to see you. Several of our board members, myself and many, many others in our community participated in the annual ShareFest. This year it was out at Levings Lake. Tremendous work was done by our community, and I know I saw some of the folks in this room there as well, and it was an honor to be part of the day. Levings is a very special place to many people in this community, and just want to thank these gentlemen for all that they do. I'll let them speak, but I want to read a quick proclamation with your, if you'll indulge me. In recognition of Rockford ShareFest, whereas Rockford ShareFest exists to identify, develop, and lead projects empowering volunteers and donors to use their abilities and resources to make an impact for the common good. And whereas since 2007, Rockford ShareFest volunteers have been helping make a difference in the community by providing major makeovers in Rockford public schools and parks. Whereas Rockford ShareFest builds spirit and pride in the community, and volunteers form a special bond as they work side by side. Whereas for 9 days, more than 2,900 volunteers helped expand Levings Park with environmental improvements, playground upgrades, an amphitheater, and expansion of West Rock Wake Park, while building unity and relationships along the way. Whereas Rockford ShareFest has made a big difference in how the community looks and how people feel about the place they live. Now therefore be it resolved, on behalf of the Winnebago County Board, this proclamation hereby recognizes, affirms, and celebrates the work spirit and dedication, Rockford ShareFest leadership, and to all its volunteers. It's an honor to have you here tonight, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of literally the thousands of volunteers that are part of the movement of Rockford ShareFest, thank you. You know, Rockford Share Fest really is not about, obviously, it's not about an individual or a group of individuals. It is just core of who we are as a community. We are a community that is not afraid to roll up our sleeves and take on whatever problems and challenges and opportunities exist in front of us. And you know, we have made this commitment over the past 11 years to figure out how can we equip and mobilize and release the people of Rockford simply to be the people of Rockford. We are a blue-collar, hard-working community that is not afraid to take on challenges. So, you know, I thought this year's project was probably as good of an example as any because of the level of collaboration that happened between government agencies, between private sector agencies, and between just plain people, neighbors, people that care about our community. And so I thought, you know, it might be fun real quick just to kind of run through what happens when the people of our community decide, I think we can do that. So I have this little list real quick that I just want to read to you. So as you mentioned, Chairman, we had 2,970 volunteer shifts filled. That equates to roughly 12,000 volunteer hours. What can you do with 12,000 volunteer hours? 254 dead ash trees were cut down and cleaned up and removed. 6 new picnic tables were created from the ash tree stumps. The concert venue out there is temporary and was expanded as the Park District works to find funding to build a permanent facility out there. 198 picnic tables, 8 bleachers, 25 benches, and all of the garbage cans in the park were repaired and painted. The beach house was remodeled and renovated for better wake park use. 3 floating barges were built and launched into Levings Lake, and that was no small feat because once we got them built, we realized these things weigh anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 pounds. We got to figure out how to get them to the water. Luckily, the Egyptians did it before us, so we figured it out. 20 floating biohaven islands were planted and launched into the lake. 6 Adirondack chairs built and painted. 2 shelters, the boathouse, the beach house, were re-roofed. Actually, we've got some pictures you can kind of scroll through and kind of see as I'm down there, I think. So 2 shelters, the boathouse, the beach house were re-roofed. 5 shelters, the boathouse, and bathrooms were all repainted. The Pier Pond entrance basketball and tennis courts and their fencing were removed to prepare for new wetlands. The lighted basketball and tennis courts that are up kind of in the center of the park were resurfaced, and a new futsal court was resurfaced and is being designed. That'll be the first one in Rockford. The softball diamond was, the infield was recut and resurfaced, and a new playground was installed in a partnership with Healing Communities. There's more. 2 dumpster corrals were built and maintenance sheds were paid. 4 new grills with lids, which was a very, very big thing to Albert. We had the first ever grills with lids in the park were installed. 3 Martin bird houses were rebuilt and relocated. And new landscaping at each entrance was designed, built, and installed. And you know, the bottom line again, those are the things that got done, but the important part is the people that engaged, because they now have a deeper sense of this is who we are as a community, and they have a deeper sense of ownership. So I just want to again say thanks to the county has been a key part of this whole partnership with Levings Lake. Thank you for that. And thanks for the opportunity for Rockfordians to be Rockfordians. Make things happen. Thank you.
Bear with me 1 minute.
Chairman, you're in it. 1, 2, 3. Oh, can you hold up that proclamation, please? 1, 2, 3. Cheese. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. I want to thank Mr. Nicolosi, Mr. McDonald and his wife, and I believe on a separate day, Mrs. Red and Mr. Wilson also participated. And let's be honest, our board and people in the county are volunteering all over the community this is one example. We don't get to honor every good thing being done in our community, but to spotlight one is to celebrate many, so thank you. Speaking of Mr. Wilson, and Juneteenth on Monday, Tommy Meeks, who leads that effort, that's an effort that the county is a part of as well, recognized board member Elsie Wilson, and he received the Helping Hand Award. And on behalf of many in the community, Elsie, I just want to say thank you for everything you're doing. And if you don't mind, come on up and grab this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary.
Yes. Thank you for your example, Elsie. We have one more that I'm slipping in with the board's okay tonight. I attended with Carla the Women's Business Expo by the Chamber today, attended their luncheon, and one of our board members was recognized as Woman Business Owner of the Year, and I want to say congratulations to Mrs. Crosby for that great award she earned, and congratulations, Jean. Thank you. For those of you who are guests, usually by this point we're done celebrating and half of the board's mad at me over something, so this is like a special night with all this good stuff, and thank you for giving the time to celebrate a whole bunch of good things. So with that, we'll move on to our next item of business. May I have a motion to approve the minutes for May 25th and to lay over the minutes from June 8th, please? I have a motion by Mr. Boomer and a second by Mr. Jury. Any questions on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes pass. Thank you very much. Announcements and communications, Clerk Mullins.
The items listed below were received as correspondence.
And we will place those on file. Thank you very much, Clerk Mullins. Next item of business, I have a few updates here. I'll move through them quickly. Mr. Westcott has served on the Rockford Area Visitors and Convention Bureau Board, and I just wanted to mention he's going to be kind of reaffirmed to that on behalf of the board as our representative. With him leading the Economic Development Committee, that seems to be a very good fit. So thank you, Mr. Westcott, for your leadership in that area. A revenue update, if I could go to Carla, just for a quick overview for the whole board of a couple of highlighted items you touched on in finance, which I think are of great interest to the entire board.
Okay. I had prepared an update on the major revenue sources for the county for the Finance Committee, and I think it's included in your packet. I just want to highlight a few items. Overall, we're down from what we had budgeted and from the prior year. For income tax, we had budgeted $327,000 more than in the prior year. However, year to date, we're down about 10.45% from the prior year. And most of this is based on 6 months of data so far this year. The 1% sales tax is budgeted at $30,000 more than the prior year, but year to date, we're down 6.52% from the prior year. The 0.25% sales tax was budgeted at $124,000 more than the prior year. However, in the current year, we're down year to date 0.49% from the prior year. Use tax, we budgeted $18,000 more than the prior year. One of the few revenues that were up 4.62% from the prior year. However, that's not one of our larger revenue sources. Replacement tax, we had budgeted $378,000 less than the prior year because the state had overpaid us a few years back, and we have a liability recorded for that. From what I understand, we've paid back about 59% of that liability, and the word is on the street that we're actually going to be forgiven the other portion of that overpayment. So year to date, that revenue stream is up 21.07%. However, that revenue source is split between the general fund, the IMRF fund, and the Social Security fund. And then the public safety sales tax, 1% tax, was budgeted at $747,000 more than the prior year. However, year to date, we're down 1.52% from the prior year. Therefore, our $1.946 million deficit budgeted in the public safety sales tax fund will be increased about $750,000. So unless those revenue streams turn around, we're not going to meet our budget expectations. And then I also wanted to mention that I outlined from these major revenue sources how much of those are used to fund debt service. And for fiscal year 17, $7,338,391 is taken out of those operating dollars to fund our debt service. And someone had asked where we're at on property taxes. Generally, what we levy for property taxes, we'll collect 99% of that levy.
Thank you, Carla. I know over the next several months before we set our budget, there'll be a very, after we get through the July 4th break, there'll be a very budget focus to a lot of our board activities. So thank you for all the good work you're doing, and others as well. With that, we'll move on to our next item. There's something I want to bring to the board's attention that is a conversation that I had with Clerk Mullins and with Nancy McPherson, our recorder. And I want to be very clear on one thing, that this is a discussion about a possibility of exploring consolidating our clerk and recorder's office. It is not a recommendation by myself or the clerk or recorder to do so, but this is something that you're seeing the county of Cook County go to. You're seeing a lot of smaller counties go to throughout the state. That does not by itself mean that we should, and that's in the best interest of our community. However, it is worth a look in exploring that, of which many updates would come to the board throughout the discussion. So this is a respectful heads up to the board that we want to look at it. That do not confuse that with the clerk or the recorder recommending that for consideration. Ultimately, that is decided by the voters. So things that are decided by voters via referendum can only be changed by voters via referendum. We are many, many steps away from any type of recommendation, but I just wanted to give a heads up that we would take a look at that and report back to the board. So I wanted to bring that to your attention, and updates will be forthcoming in the coming weeks. When we have two experienced leaders like Clerk Mullins and Nancy, we would rather have them be part of the discussion because they really know how their office runs. And I appreciate them, even if there's questions, concerns, that type of thing, that they're willing to be part of a discussion. And so I do appreciate that very, very much. With that, oh yes, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm glad you're pursuing this. We for some times have talked about that in the past. However, another one that we need to talk about, and I was fortunate yesterday to be at a golf outing where His Honor, the Mayor of Rockford, was on the same tee and teeing off before us. We had a little time to chat, and we asked him about consolidating the election board, and he's on board with that. So that's another thing we have to start looking at, where we can save a little bit of money. So thank you for your work on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Jury. The next item I had under the chairman's report, I'm going to bring in Highway Joe. He has some disturbing updates on the impact of no state budget that is going to have on projects that are underway at the county. And this needs to be on your radar as board members, so I'll turn it over to Joe if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. County board members, I have a report for you. I set on your desk its impact if the state should not pass a budget to Winnebago County. And what I want to point out to you are just a couple of things. We were notified on June 14th that any project that the state of Illinois holds the contract to, any one of those projects will not be able to go forward after June 30th because they won't have a budget if they fail to pass one before June 30th. Excuse me. The second thing I wanted to make sure you knew about is that if they do not pass a budget, our MFT funds will not be forthcoming to the highway department. And we get about $350,000 a month. And my concern on your behalf is to make sure we have enough MFT funds to carry us through next winter so that we can continue plowing snow and paying overtime to our staff. So my recommendation is to you as county board members is that any project associated with MFT funds and any project associated with state funds, that we suspend those projects going forward until we know we have a budget agreement. And doing so may create a few issues, both from a standpoint, I cannot tell you if there's going to be additional costs. From a legal standpoint, I'm working with the state's attorney on perhaps coming forward with a resolution for you, all of you, to approve at our next meeting. But it's just disappointing that we have to do this, and there's about $3.7 million worth of work that we have out there that we just can't go forward with on those circumstances. So I wanted to make sure all of you are aware of that.
Any questions for Joe? Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Joe. I might as well give you a little bit of more bad news. I just heard today that because the state of Illinois does not have a budget, it is now going to impact our credit rating also.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. I would add one other department. In between now and our next board meeting, I'll do a kind of a survey of the various departments. I've not been able to do that all the way around the horn in terms of impact by the state budget issue, but I would share that there are 2 programs that we receive state funding from in the courts, and then 2 programs are in the range of $1 million total. That would be, in flux as well. So that's just one more department in a completely different part of our mission that will be impacted on that. Moving on to our next item of business, the 1% public safety tax. Do not have a full update for you this evening. What I will tell you is that similar to the host fee process of pulling together information from a lot of different parts over the years, Carla's done an excellent job of pulling together some information I think will be great for the board to review in the community on the kind of the history of the 1% public safety tax. And so next week, we will get some of that information out to you, and I know that'll be a discussion, I'm sure, in the committee level as well. But there's been a lot of work and time that's gone into just pulling together information that was in a lot of different spots, and that will serve us well in terms of, now that we've aggregated some data, being able to have really good substantive discussions. So like the host fee back a few weeks ago with some hard work by Amanda and Julia. I want to thank Carla for her work on the 1%. And that's going to be a lot of information coming to the board here very shortly. The last item I had, and I just want to be upfront, I'm not being too facetious, maybe a little bit, is I'm not saying this because Mr. Fiducia is not here tonight, because I know he's very passionate, as are many of the board members on the Fusion Center discussion. We met with Sheriff Caruana, who is a great partner, and Chief O'Shea in Rockford back weeks ago now, and had a follow-up meeting today around the financials commitment related to the Fusion Center in partnering with the city. After talking to Carla, Amanda, and after looking at kind of how our budget conversations unfolding and some uncertainties with deficits, this is ultimately a board decision. However, we're going to recommend that we hold off on jumping off the cliff with 2 feet and saying that we're going to commit $800,000 now for the initial payment for the Fusion Center, and that we've found, because we haven't, the $300,000 or $400,000 annually. What we would like the board's permission to do is not to say no, but to say, not now, let's work through our process. We do not have a capital plan. We need a capital plan so when the board decides that we're going to do A, that does mean we're saying no to B to C, right? So we're going to have some tough choices, but I'd rather have the board have the information of all the things we're considering. I'll give you 2 things that are also part of the discussion on the capital side. Number 1, the PSP building. There's going to be a significant cost to this board, to the county, when we tear it down. But there's also a significant cost of not tearing it down and even mothballing the building. So it's going to be one of many tough discussions. Another thing that we've started down the road on, the board approved back a couple of months ago, was a little baby step in the process that I would want to applaud our public safety leaders on taking, and that's this move towards shared records management. Gus can talk about it in a much more detailed way than I can, but bottom line, it allows our different agencies to share records in law enforcement. We need to identify our long-term funding strategy for that as part of long-term planning, which is key to public safety. My point is this, it's not that we can't do fusion, but we're asking the board's okay to not jump right now, and let's really do our due diligence. In talking to Sheriff Caruana and to Chief O'Shea, I said, this is what we're going to recommend to our board, and unless they want to go full throttle right now, would we be able to jump in once we pass our budget? And Chief O'Shea and Sheriff Caruana said absolutely. Does that mean Chief O'Shea needs to reconnoiter some things? Perhaps. But obviously, we'd love to be able to do this right now, but it does not mean we cannot partner with the city on this important stuff later. So I wanted to give that recommendation. In talking to Carla, this idea that we could just bond it, we could just put this particular expense and bond it out. That is not something, and I don't normally speak for Carla, not if you disagree or if there's anything, but the recommendation by our CFO is not to do that, given our debt load. I agree with that assessment. Let's go through the process on all things in fiscal year 18 and revisit it. And so we can certainly have this conversation coming in the coming weeks, but at this time, and unless there's major outcry or objection by the board, that's how we would proceed and just make it part of the whole discussion. Any questions, comments, concerns on this? Yes, Mrs. Gorham.
The only thing I want to ask of you, I understand the whole budget thing, but how many of our members really understand what the Fusion program is and why we would be working for it? And they should have a demonstration on what it is, how it operates, and why we truly need it. And that way they can then set their goals to get this done and not put it on the back burner. And we should be working towards it, not against it.
Right.
So I do hope that you will make arrangements for the whole board to be able to view what the whole Fusion Center is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Gorham. We can absolutely make arrangements to continue to learn about why this is a good investment, why this is going to help on the public safety side as well. So absolutely respect your point. Mr. Schultz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We did have the preliminary presentation, at least, in a board meeting previously, as you all are aware. But my primary point would be, we know that we have substantial budgetary challenges. We know that we're facing budget reductions. That's something that's apparent to us and has been for some time. As the Fusion Center is being discussed, one of the things they mentioned in the presentation is that this is a way to gain efficiencies. And as a result of that comment, my thought would be the ball is firmly in the sheriff's court, where if he can assure us that this is a value-added thing that will bring efficiencies that will offset the cost of the Fusion Center, and can assure us of that, and that in the budget process, that is the intent in which he's going to approach the recommendation regarding spending, then I think we have the ability to move ahead.
Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Schultz. In talking to the sheriff, just in passing on this very topic, one of the things that we discussed was that given our budget scenario, given some other priorities in the sheriff's department, before we went ahead and said yes to this, there was some agreement with the sheriff that let's make sure we're looking at everything so that he can help prioritize his needs as the sheriff as well, since there's not new money readily available. So he was in agreement with this idea of taking it a little bit slow, so that if we made a commitment right now for a lot of new dollars, we don't want on the backside to be making a different decision about cutting something else. So to Mr. Schultz's point, that'll be an ongoing discussion with the sheriff. Thank you very much. Any other questions on anything in the chairman's report? Yes, sir, Mr. Fellers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have an update on the IGA Federal Marshal Service? We talked about that about 3 or 4 sessions ago.
Yes. The long and the short of it is that the state's attorney and the sheriff are working through that. And as we talked about the night that I guess it was decided there would not be a pursuit of the ICE detention center, that we know as a board a couple things. Number one, there is not a signed document on the federal prisoner side, separate completely from ICE. The community, my understanding is the board, the prior board and this board support the ongoing efforts of federal prisoners being in our jail. It has worked, it has been a positive revenue source, there's not been issues. Again, can't speak for the board, but that is my firm understanding from board members I've talked to and the community members. That said, we never had a signed IGA by the board. It is my understanding that would be forthcoming. The state's attorney needed some time amongst his other priorities to look at that with the sheriff, so that should be coming in the near future. I do not have an exact date. In the meantime, do not let anybody in the community convince you otherwise. There is not and will not be ICE detainees in our jail. There is no backdoor effort by anybody on our board, myself, the sheriff, nobody. That's just simply not happening. So while we're allowing the state's attorney and the sheriff a little bit of time to work through that, that's a dotting of I's, crossing of T's, but there's no backdoor move. Everything's straight up. There are no ICE detainees. There will not be in the current arrangement. Any other questions by board members? Yes, sir, Mr. Booker.
Thank you, Chairman. Is this this report of the failure of the state to pass a budget, is that part of the chairman's report?
That would be from Highway Joe. Yes.
Right. I just have a quick question. If the state grants that are already awarded, is this the failure to pass this budget, does that affect the grants that have already been awarded?
But thank you, Mr. Chairman. Anything to do with the Highway Department on grants, it would affect any funding coming from the state. As I understand it, it doesn't matter if it's the DNR, the EPA, a state elements, the EPA, or the Department of Transportation. Any monies that they have invested in projects we're doing would be affected because they can't write out checks to pay for anything after June 30th.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. So, and one further thing, any monies we've received to date, we do not have to give back. It would just be going forward. That would be my understanding. Yeah. Okay, any other questions by board members? Thank you. Oh, yes, Mr. Jury.
Thank you. I have one communication. On each of the board members' desks, you'll find that I left a report on the hotline, and this is an update from Auditor Crowley. We had a committee meeting, and we brought him in to give us an update on how the hotline was going. For board members that weren't here, he was supposed to come back with a report and give us an update. During the committee meeting, we found there were several items that need to be addressed. For instance, one of them would be that the hotline is not on the website, so we will be bringing Mr. Crowley back to operations and administrative committee meetings, and we will be working out some adjustments on the hotline. So be aware, but this is for your knowledge, a little bit of what was going on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jury. I missed board member correspondence. My apologies. Any board member comments? Seeing none, we can move on to our next item of business, the consent agenda. May I have a motion to approve the consent agenda, please? I have Mr. Nicolosi on a motion and a second by Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Fellers, and Mrs. Gorel. Any questions on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Consent agenda passes. Thank you very much. Next item of business, the standing committee reports, finance committee, and pinch hitting for Ted Biondo is Mr. Gorel. Thank you, Mr. Gorel.
Thank you, Chairman. Your Finance Committee has one budget amendment tonight, and then it's 2017-21, and it's a budget amendment in regards to the Sheriff's Department and the McChesney Park Police Services Agreement for additional revenue or a promotion from Sergeant to Lieutenant, and the cost of that will be covered by McChesney Park through the contract, and it is in for a first reading, and I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules on this.
We have a motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Girl. I have a second by Mr. McDonald, Mr. Jury, and Mr. Boomer and Mr. Nicolosi. Any questions by board members before we take the vote to suspend the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed to suspending the rules? Seeing none, motion to suspend passes. Mr. Grohl.
Thank you, Chairman. On that mark, I would like to make a motion to pass Budget Amendment 2017-21.
We have a motion by Mr. Grohl, second by Mr. McDonald, Mr. Huffman, Mr. Jury, Mr. Nicolosi, and I believe Mr. Wilson as well. Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, I will ask, are there any objections to the motion before us? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes.
Thank you, Chairman. That concludes our report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grohl. Zoning Committee, Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Chairman. The Zoning Committee has 4 items coming before you tonight. These are all in for layover. There'll be no rule suspension on these. The first is special use permits, SU 0417. It's a special use permit for restricted landing area, if you're following along. Second, item B is V 0217. It's a variance to reduce driveway width for a 2-way drive from 10 feet to 18. The first, by the way, came with approval from both committee and zoning board of appeals with conditions. And item B also comes to you with conditions. Item C is Z 1017. It's a map amendment. That's to rezone plus or minus 3.25 acres. And item D is a companion piece to C, and that is Z 1117. And that's a map amendment to rezone plus or minus 5 acres from ag to rural ag. And both of those items got unanimous approval from both committee and zoning board of appeals. So they're in for first reading.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Webster.
Thank you.
Next item of business, Economic Development Committee, Mr. Westcott.
Thank you, Chairman. We have no report, but we will be having a meeting fairly soon, and we'll set out notices for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Next item of business, Operations Administrative Committee, Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Your Operation Administrative Committee has several resolutions and ordinances before you this evening, and we'll take the first one. This is a resolution combining election precincts, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury and a second all over the place. Mr. Westcott, Mrs. Crosby, Mr. Hoffman, Mr. Girl, Mr. Boomer, Mrs. Red, Mr. Nicolosi. Any questions by board members on the motion before us? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. The next resolution is authorizing execution of intergovernmental agreement between the Forest Preserve of Winnebago County and Winnebago County for administrative services, and I move for its adoption.
Before we go to that, Mr. Jury, do you want to go to C or do you want to?
I'm sorry, we have I'm sorry, I took that a minute ago. All right. We have an ordinance reading in for the first time. It's an ordinance amending the travel regulation ordinance for Winnebago County, and I would like to move to suspend the rules.
We have a motion to suspend by Mr. Jury. I have a second by Mr. Girl and Mr. Nicolosi. Any discussion on the motion to suspend the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion to suspend passes. Mr. Jury.
Now I move for its adoption.
We have a motion to approve the travel policy by Mr. Jury, second by Mr. Girl and Mr. Wilson. Any questions by board members? Yes, Mr. Salgado.
Just a kind of quick question. I know that basically there's travel vouchers and stuff like that. So one of the questions is, do we give any advances for travel expenses, or it's strictly out of pocket and then therefore reimbursed as a travel voucher?
I'll go to Carla on that.
We don't give advances.
And then I got another question actually, on mileage reimbursement. I know it's part of the travel, but on a regular basis, do you know what the average is for that coming in? Like, people submitting their mileage reports?
Carla?
I think typically the carpool is used, that's my understanding.
So there is no travel mileage reimbursement?
There is.
I just wanted to see how long it takes for individuals to submit those reports for mileage reimbursement.
I'm hearing Clerk Mullins in my ears say 7 days, and I do not know that answer, but she was helpful with that information. One thing I would add, and then I'll go to Mrs. Red, there's a state law that says we need to adopt a travel policy form by July 1. So this is step one in probably a couple of changes to the travel policy. The second change to the travel policy will be later this summer when we have our new procurement cards. Once we make that change, that may dictate some travel policy changes as well. But this one is part of a state, I think, forcing us in compliance with a state statute that's come forward.
And that is correct. I did see the 7 days as for the travel vouchers to be reimbursed or whatever to be turned in. So I did see that, but I was just looking to see what the average was from, but it's 7 days of March. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salgado. Mrs. Red.
Thank you, Chairman. What is the rationale for not getting per diem?
The rationale for not getting a per diem?
Yes.
I couldn't speak to that. I'm not as familiar with the policy as I've not used it personally as an employee yet myself. Is there anyone who could speak to that? I can't speak to the policy that we've inherited that we'll be looking in at, and quite frankly, we would not have brought this forward right now because we haven't looked at all aspects of it. We're just merely coming into compliance with the state statute, but we're going to look at more of the whole 360, all aspects in the next phase of the policy revision. So if you'd like us to look at that, Mrs. Red, we'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Red. Mr. Crow.
Thank you, Chairman. Does this policy only, is it only for our employees here at the county, or does it, at least as far as your administration is concerned, or does this pertain to all the employees in the county, say the court systems, does this pertain to all the employees or just the ones underneath the administration's control?
I will defer to Mr. Kurlinkus on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a travel reimbursement policy that would cover everybody in the county. It's required by the new state laws that Chairman indicated. So it's one of the things that we didn't have was we didn't have a form that had to be attached to this thing. So that was one of the big things. But this is designed to cover the entire county.
Excellent. Thank you.
So when there is no state law to back it up and it's just a county ordinance, then you can get into more of that discussion when there's a state law that supersedes anything we're doing here locally. Any other questions on this ordinance before us? Seeing none, are there any objections? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote for all members present. Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Now we'll go back to this one. I apologize, I didn't have this in order. Now we'll go back to the resolution executing an intergovernmental agreement between the 4th Reserve of Winnebago County and Winnebago County for Administrative Services. I move for its adoption.
We have a motion on item D. We have a second by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Westcott on item D. Any discussion by board members on this resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you. And finally, we have two ordinances. I'm going to try to read them both in at the same time for the first reading, and then I would like a motion to suspend the rules. These are two ordinances. One is creating the position of financial officer, and the other is creating the office of administrator. I move to suspend the rules.
We have a motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Jury and a second by Mr. Hoffman. Any discussion on the motion to suspend the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion to suspend the rules passes. Mr. Jury.
Thank you, Chairman Haney. Now I move for their adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Jury, and I have a second by Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Boomer. Any discussion by board members on these two ordinances? Yes, Mr. Salgado.
I have two questions. The first one is, I noticed that it said appointment and dismissal. So are we hiring these individuals, or because from my perspective, and I'm sorry that by definition, by appointment, it almost seems like we're handpicking an individual based on the discretion of whether it's the chairman or whoever it may be. So that's where I come from, the question of clarification on the appointment and dismissal. So is it a hiring practice where it goes through HR? And I know that it came about that way with the CFO and Amanda's position, but it's just from clarification as appointment and dismissal. Yes. It just sounds like more, where and it could be discussed whether the state's attorney could give guidance on that, but it just seems like, it's someone being appointed versus being hired. So I just wanted to make that point of clarification and see if you have any rationale for that.
Yes, I'm happy to speak to that, and then I would defer to Mr. Kurlinkus if he wants to chime in. Couple things. Based on a prior opinion by the state's attorney's office, I think it was directed to Mr. Kurlinkus, the board doesn't technically have employees, so the two employees that are on these two ordinances do report to the chairman's position. Just like when we make I would make a recommendation as chairman to an appointed board in the community. I won't get caught up in hiring or appointing, but I make a recommendation, then the board would approve or disapprove of that recommendation. And then if there would be a dismissal situation, although I have no concerns presently at all with the good work being done, it is a very good idea to have an exit strategy if you have an entrance strategy. So we know how we're doing it before we go through the process. That's good governance. So I would make a recommendation of a particular termination only for these two positions. No other positions would come before the board for termination that would need board approval, majority vote in which to dismiss your administrator and or your CFO. Again, no concerns at this point, but at the same time, you want to have that in writing and clear in an ordinance. We did not have the CFO position established, which is a new position. That makes all kinds of sense. Comparing to other counties real quick, we're not really an outlier. Some counties have exactly this setup. Some are a little bit different. Some it's totally at the chairman's discretion, but we're certainly in boundaries of what other well-functioning counties are doing. I think this is a good approach. I appreciate the discussion and some of the back and forth. Once I talked to Mr. Jury about a couple things we added to really define the positions too. So I appreciate the conversation. Mr. Kurlinkus, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to answer Mr. Salgado's question, all this is a hiring recommendation with the advice and consent of the county board for the hiring and the and should it be necessary dismissal. So it's advice and consent, similar to a lot of the other appointments that the chairman indicated.
Thank you. The second piece, now that we kind of got clarification on what their roles are and what they're going to be supervising, is there a way that we could get like an org chart, the structure of essentially the CFO and what falls under, based on the department, obviously accounting and all that stuff, the finance department. So could we get something similar to that, an organizational chart based on your structure that you guys have, based on these two items that you guys presented?
Yes, sir. I'm going to have Julia resend the org chart as it stands today, always subject to change. We will continue to fill out job descriptions as we go through processes this year, but we're certainly happy. I know about a month and a half ago, there was a chart sent that has remained unchanged, and we'll resend that out to the entire board tomorrow, if that's okay, Julia. That way people can look at it with this kind of new paradigm in mind of these two ordinances in place. And then if there's any questions, we're happy to take them.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie, for your question, and I think that establishes the separation of administrator and CFO. I would like to thank the chairman for his work and working with me and the committee on these issues. I think this is very important for Winnebago County, and it's something that needs to be passed. I want to thank all of you for all your help. Thank you.
Mr. Jury did a nice job on this. I got Mr. Booker had, I believe, a question, and then we could go back to you.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just looking through the ordinance here, and just to assist my colleague, Mr. Salgado, I'm looking at, looks like the duties are listed here in the ordinance. That's what I'm looking at now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Booker. Any other questions by board members? Okay. With that, we're going to take both E and F, the administrator and the CFO ordinances together. So are there any board members who object to the motion before us? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to cast a yes vote to all members present. Motion passes. Mr. Chair.
Thank you. That concludes our report.
Next item of business, Public Works Committee, Mr. Kelly.
We have no report this time. Our next meeting is going to be held on Wednesday, July 5th, instead of our regular first Tuesday, which would be the 4th.
Okay, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Next item of business, Public Safety Committee, and pinch hitting for Mr. Fiducia, we have Mr. Nicolosi.
Thank you. Your Public Safety Committee has one resolution. A resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental cooperation agreement for police services with the Village of Machesney Park, Illinois, and I move for its adoption.
We have a motion by Mr. Nicolosi and a second by Mr. Westcott, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Boomer, and Mr. Girdle and Mrs. Red. Any questions by board members? This is the other piece, the accompanying piece to the actual budget amendment we passed under the finance section with this agreement with Machesney Park. So it's kind of in tandem. Sorry they got split out in the committee report out. That's my mistake. Any questions by board members? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Mr. Nicolosi.
That concludes our report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicolosi. Unfinished business. Mr. Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been thinking about the report that was provided to us by Mr. Vanderworth and the concern going forward about the implications of these contracts that are midstream, as well as the projects and related to conditions of the roads, etc. And I'm just concerned that if there's something that needs to be prioritized from a cash flow standpoint among the projects, that we would get timely feedback from the Highway Department and from Carla as it relates to how do we stopgap this, how do we find temporary funding, and maybe we'll be fortunate enough that there'll be no instances of the list that Joe provided where that's necessary, but I have this heartburn around those issues and concerned about us being responsible, for example, not doubling the cost of a project because we didn't handle it in a timely manner the way we should have. So that's just an example of what we might find.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. I think you make a very good point. Mr. Kelly.
Yes, Mr. Vanderwerf and I communicate regularly, and I'm sure he would bring it to the Public Works Committee if anything was of an emergency nature, like that problem we had on Perryville Road just north of Guilford Road. You know, and this, we're just trying to conserve resources, you know, because we don't know what's going to happen. But of course, we'll deal with any emergency situations we need to.
And I would agree that Highway Joe does a great job of communicating with my office and with this committee. If there is an emergency or something develops, what I'll promise the board and you, Mr. Schultz, specifically, is that we will get word out to the entire board quickly if it's kind of a between meeting situation, and make sure that on July 5th, when you have your next meeting, that we reemphasize to him the concern raised for obvious reasons. That's okay. Okay, thank you, Mr. Schultz. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Webster.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the fact that Joe brought this before us tonight, two things. One is that, yes, he's a great communicator with us. He does let us know what's going on. But But the other is, what a sobering thing this piece is right here. When you think about it here, June 30th, planning on not proceeding with 10 projects. 10 projects we got in our area, in our county here, worth $3,680,000 come to a halt on June 30th. If these people down in Springfield had any idea what a crushing blow this is on all the counties, really, but on ours, I mean, we're in such crappy shape now anyways, financially. And this is just like getting kicked in the teeth. And what effect is this going to have when all these projects, 10 projects, get shut down all around the county? How many guys are going to be put out of work again and going to be sitting on the bench, all the union guys are sitting on the bench, collecting unemployment or what have you, until these morons down in Springfield get their act together? It's just such an embarrassment, you know. You go somewhere and somebody says, where are you from? And you're ashamed to say you're from Illinois. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Any other comments, Mr. Jury?
Yeah, along with what Jim said, you know, I'm wondering if the longer this goes on, is this by any way, shape, or mean going to affect the daily operations of our highway department with state funds? I don't know how much they rely on state funds, but I mean, if we don't have the funds, are we going to have to lay off people because we don't have the funds? There's nothing for them to do. Jim, it is a shame. You have people there in Springfield on both sides of the aisle, and even in the Supreme Court, as long as we're talking, they keep passing these unfunded mandates and keep giving us bills and expect us to pay for them. We don't have the money. It's a crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jury. Mr. Kelly.
Yes, you recall that in his presentation, Joe mentioned that expense of motor fuel tax funds is going to be slowed down dramatically in order to try and conserve resources so that doesn't happen. We do have reserves at this point, but we want to try and conserve the reserves.
Yes, sir. Well said. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I'll move to new business. We have a couple of board appointments. Both of them are related to the Wraith Board, the Rockford Area Venues and Entertainment Authority. That is the authority that oversees BMO in the Coronado Theater. And we have one gentleman, Mike Scherger, who we're recommending for reappointment. He's very active on that board. Luz Ramirez, who's our appointee, the county's appointee to the board, a very active member of the Coalition of Latino Leaders, is stepping off that board. I'd very much like to get her re-engaged in another board of her choosing, of her interests. She's fantastic. In her place, I am recommending to the county board Rudy Valdez, who I believe most of the people in this room would know him through his many pursuits and community service activities, and I think he'll be a great fit on a very dynamic, important board for our region. So I have that in to read in tonight. I see a hand up. I'll go to Mr. Webster first.
Yeah, both of the above named persons you have there are excellent choices. They both have terrific credentials, and I would move that we suspend and get them in place tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. So we have a motion to suspend the rules by Mr. Webster. I have a second by Mr. Westcott, Mr. Fellers, Mr. Jury, and Mr. Girl. The motion to suspend is before us. Any questions on the motion to suspend the rules? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. I'll go to Mr. Westcott.
Motion to approve the appointment.
We have a motion by Mr. Webster to approve A and B, Mike Scherger and Rudy Valdez. Motion by Mr. Westcott, a second by Mr. Jury and Mr. Girl. Any questions on the motion before us to approve these two appointees? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We got two new appointees. Thank you very much for your support on that. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Fellers on the motion, Mr. Boomer on the second, and Mr. Girl. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Happy 4th of July. See you on the other side.